All I really want to say is that he is a remarkable journalist when many of us here are journalists, and he stands out amongst us as a very brave and somewhat lone voice whose interpretation of events and reporting of events in Israel and in the occupied territories is unique. And his book, The Punishment of Gaza, is a compendium of the articles that he wrote at the time. And I also happened to be in the region and was indeed on the border of Gaza at the time of the attack. So obviously that is a centerpiece. But in many ways he's been writing, I mean, since the late 80s for Haaretz, itself a very regarded paper both inside and outside Israel, even if only consumed by a minority of newspaper readers. So what we thought we'd do tonight is he's going to talk for about 10 or 15 minutes. This is the wonderful thing about Gideon. He is a lyrical speaker, as lyrical as a writer, and a lyrical speaker in a language which isn't his own, which is always a wonderful achievement and a lovely thing to listen to, irrespective of the content. But he's going to speak for about 10 or 12 minutes, and then I'll ask him a few tedious hack questions, and then you can ask the real McCoy after that. Gideon Levy.
Thank you. Thank you, John. After this introduction, the best thing I could do is just to keep silent and to go home, because nothing will meet the expectations. And besides, I suggest we go for a world tour, both of us. And I have a real challenge today, namely not to make you borrowed, John, because you heard me yesterday, and I hope I will not be boring you by repeating myself and repeating my jokes. But as I guess at least part of us tonight are journalists, I would rather dedicate a bigger part tonight about the Israeli media and its role in collaborating with the Israeli occupation, because I think it's a major role, a fatal role, and I'll elaborate about it soon. I just want to say one or two sentences about myself, because I think it has some meaning. I was brought up, as I always say, as a good boy Tel Aviv. I am a typical product of the Israeli education system. I was brought up in an apolitical home. I served in the army radio station. I did even something which is much worse than this. I worked for Shimon Peres for 4 years in the late 70s and in the beginning of the 80s, when he was then leader of the opposition and chairman of the Israeli Labour Party. And it's only about the late 80s when I started to travel to the occupied territories, when I first realized that the biggest drama of Israel is taking place in its dark backyard, and there are so very few people around me. You journalists would appreciate it, that almost each of my stories ever since then is an exclusive story. It's the wet dream of any journalist to have just exclusive stories. But in my case, it's very unfortunate, because except of 1, 2, or 3 Israeli colleagues, there's no one there to tell the Israelis what they don't want to hear. There's no one there to document for the Israelis what is being done on their behalf on a daily basis, half an hour away from their homes. An occupation which is a very, very unique occupation. First of all, it's part and parcel of Israel. Nobody can claim anymore that the occupation is temporary, that the occupation is about to end, because Israel existed only 19 years without the occupation and over 42 years with the occupation. So let's not talk anymore about the occupation as something which does not belong to the state of Israel. It's part and parcel of the state of Israel. But it's a very, very unique occupation. There were many more brutal occupations in history, many more cruel and even much longer ones. But there was never an occupation, as far as I can recall, that the occupier felt so good about himself. And what is even worse than this, There was never in history an occupation in which the occupier victimized himself and felt that he's the victim, the only victim, and the whole occupation is forced on him. As the late Golda Meir phrased it, the unforgettable Golda Meir, who said once that we will never forgive the Arabs for forcing us to kill their children, which is so typical to the way of thinking of the Israeli society. Now, the occupation is now 42, 43 years old, does not seem to come to its end, far of it. From my point of view, it's just getting deeper, more brutal, more cruel in many ways. And for years I was asking myself, how come that this occupation is lasting for so long without creating any moral questions, any doubts in the Israeli society, for sure not in the last 10 years or so, when the occupation is totally not on the Israeli agenda, when it's hardly discussed. We remember the times in which we used to say that two Israelis share three views. Today, three Israelis hardly share one view. No political discussion, but we'll get to it. But the question, how come that such an occupation could last for so long when Israelis are so content about themselves, deeply convinced that the IDF is the most moral army in the world, try to tell them, as I tried once, that we are the second moral army in the world. Let's say the army of Liechtenstein is more moral. No, they would say, no way. The IDF is the most moral army in the world. They are deeply convinced. How come this is possible? And it took me some years to get to the answer, and I think I got it. Israelis, part of you have met them, are not monsters. Part of them are really people with values, people who appreciate human rights, people who appreciate law. You can see it in every catastrophe in the world. Israel is almost the first one to send rescue teams, to build a field hospital. They would help any old lady to cross the road, many times even if she doesn't want to cross the road. People with values. And what's happening when it comes to the backyard, when it comes to the Palestinians? And it took me some years, as I said, to come to the conclusion that the key, the core of the problem, the really key explanation for how the occupation can continue, can last for so long, is the dehumanization of the Palestinians, mainly by the Israeli media. Because the Israelis have created themselves a world in which they feel very good about themselves, they perceive themselves as very moral, and with the Palestinians, you know, human rights are about human beings. Most of the Israelis, if not all of them, if you just scratch a little bit their skin, you will realize that almost all the Israelis don't perceive the Palestinians as human beings, for sure not as equal human beings. And that's the key issue, because as long as this will not change, nothing will change. As long as the Israelis will not perceive the Palestinians as human beings, which enables them to continue the occupation without any moral doubts, as long as this will continue, nothing will change. And the biggest agent which is promoting this dehumanization for decades now is unfortunately the Israeli media. The Israeli media, a very free one, a very professional one, almost no censorship in Israel, almost no censorship. But there is something which is much worse than censorship, and this is self-censorship. Because against self-censorship, there is no resistance. It's voluntarily. And the Israeli media systematically serves the narrative of the occupation, serves the narrative of the victimization, and serves the narrative of the dehumanization, and demonization of the Palestinians and the Arabs as a whole. And I'm sorry to repeat myself, but I have to give this example of yesterday, because I think this example tells the whole story. In Operation Castle, there were 2 Israeli dogs killed. One dog was killed in a villa in the south part of Israel in Ashkelon, and the other dog was accompanying the troops inside Gaza. They were both killed in 2 different days. Both dogs got front page coverage when they were killed. The funeral was covered. There were pictures of those dogs in front page popular newspapers. The owners would be quoted, how wonderful those dogs were, how faithful they were, how happy they were. It was a whole big story in both cases. In the very same days that those 2 dogs were killed, there were obviously tens and hundreds of Palestinians killed. The story appeared in the Israeli popular press, but where and how? Page 15, page 16, 1 column, no names, no images, obviously, no pictures, nothing. Hardly a title. 75 Palestinians killed, 85 Palestinians killed, 200 Palestinians killed. And what is the message? As horrible as it sounds, the message is to the reader, 2 Israeli dogs' life is worth more than tens and hundreds of Palestinians' lives. And I'm not exaggerating. Each of you can check it in the archives, in Yediot Achronot, in Ma'ariv, in the popular newspapers of Israel. Those stories appeared, and this is, on a systematic level, the role that the Israeli media is playing voluntarily, trying to please the readers, trying not to bother them, trying to prevent any kind of political discussion, telling them what they want to hear, writing them what they want to read, and ignoring systematically the occupation, the atrocities, avoiding descriptions, avoiding any sign of humanization of the Palestinians. The other day, there was in YouTube, I don't know if you saw it, a short video of a Palestinian child who was crying when his father was arrested in Hebron. It was quite spread online all over the world. And a guard police spokesman was asked about this scene because it was heartbreaking. I went to meet this child, 4-year-old child, whose father was arrested in front of him. And you know what the spokesman of the border police had answered to the question, what happened there? He said it was all fabricated. The family pushed the child to cry in front of the cameras. And here lies the whole attitude. Palestinian children don't cry when their fathers are arrested in front of them. Palestinian children don't cry when their fathers are being beaten in a violent way like his father was beaten. Palestinian children don't cry spontaneously when their parents are humiliated in front of them. It's only when you push them to cry because they're not human beings like us, because Palestinian children are different. Our children could have cried, could have been traumatized, but not theirs. And this, when it goes on like this, on a systematic basis, enables the Israelis to feel so good about themselves. And this brings me to the conclusion, and by this I'll finish my opening remarks. This brings me to the definite conclusion that we can't expect any change which will come from within the Israeli society, which is in the last 10 years or so in a condition of coma, total blindness, being concerned about the next vacation, the next Jeep, being concerned about only individual needs, totally ignoring the occupation, and having a wonderful life, because life in Israel, for most of the Israelis, not for all of them, is wonderful. So why to go for a change? Why to bother about evacuating settlements? It's not that the Israelis care much about the settlements. Most of them have never been there. But who needs this headache, this hassle about evacuating settlements? What for? when life is so good? What for? So unfortunately, I can't see any change coming from within the society. And in the same time, I don't see any courageous leadership who would lead the society to the needed, courageous, major steps, mainly to put an end to the Israeli occupation. And when this is the situation, when people like me can't expect much to come from within the society, our only hope is from the outside. The problem is that the outside in the Middle East is, above all, Washington. And Washington was disappointing us in the last 1.5 years, those of us who had hopes. And for us, a hope from the outside is a very problematic one, because people like me are not sure what is the right way to go. And maybe if I will be asked, I'll say something about the sanctions, which is a big issue here. But I can just tell you that for us Israelis who are Israeli patriots, and from my point of view, I consider myself as an Israeli patriot. I care about Israel. I care about its future. I was once in Sarajevo in the siege in '93, and I saw many worse atrocities that I've ever seen in the West Bank and Gaza. But it was not in my behalf. I didn't feel responsible. I didn't feel ashamed. I felt maybe ashamed as a human being. But it's different when you belong. It's different when you feel that these atrocities are being done by the sons of your friends and the friends of your sons. So the appeal to the world to do something is a very problematic one, because it can go both ways. It can turn the Israeli society into more nationalism and more extremism. Because the Israelis have invented themselves a world of their own. 70 billion people of the world are wrong, and 5 million Jews of Israel are right. Not only this, any kind of criticism about Israel is an ultimate proof that the Holocaust is around the corner, that the world is anti-Semitic, that whatever we do, the world will be against us. And by this, we release ourselves from any responsibility, because anyhow, it's the world's fault, not our fault. The world is anti-Semitic, therefore it criticizes Israel. Forgetting that there were other years, like the Oslo years, in which the world was applauding Israel and hugging Israel. Where was anti-Semitism there? And by this I don't mean there is no anti-Semitism, sure it is. But should Israel supply it with more weapons? Should it give it more reasons? And here I think that Operation Cast Lead was a turning point. And the world, at least the public opinions, not yet the governments, is much less tolerant, much less patient about the Israeli aggressions, about the Israeli violence, and above all, about the way of thinking, which was well proven again in the flotilla affair, showing that Israel did not learn anything and didn't forget anything from Cast Lead. Because again, the first mean is a violent one, not as a last option, but as a first option. This feeling that we Israelis have the right to do whatever we want, wherever we want, international water, not international water. This way of thinking that international law does not concern us. For many Israelis, international law is, again, something anti-Semitic, even though international law in its modern way was created after the Holocaust and after World War II. But for many Israelis, international law is something very hostile, does not concern Israel. This is good for other countries, not for us. And the world has more attention at Israel than any other place. We have to be fair about it. Israel is being treated otherwise than any other country in the world, for many historical reasons and others. Israel is treated in another way. For the good and for the bad, Israel benefited a lot of being another entity, and is also paying a price for being more criticized. Sure, if you want to belong to the Western world, if you want to be considered as a democracy, you have also to pay the price when you turn bad. We are old enough, all of us here, to know that you can't be half pregnant. Unfortunately, many times we would like to have some half pregnancy. Either you are pregnant or you are not pregnant. Either you are a democracy or you are not a democracy. There is no democracy in the world which goes according to a geographic line and say, we are a democracy from here to here, and from here to here, we are a brutal tyranny. There is no democracy in the world who claims that I'm a democracy according to a demographic line, that I'm a democracy only to certain people and to others, new rules and new games. So either you are a democracy or not, and the question if Israel is a democracy is a question with having this occupation in its backyard. And last word about optimism. It's not only that you have to be realistic enough to believe in miracles, it's also that many historical developments, recent developments, were totally unexpected. Would we have sitting here in the late 80s and I would have told you that Soviet Russia is going to collapse, that the Berlin Wall is going to fall, and that the apartheid regime in South Africa is going to crash, you might have laughed at me. And all those happened. So maybe also the Israeli occupation will come to its end by itself. It is rotten enough to fall by itself. But we have the problem of hundreds of thousands of settlers, which is the main obstacle. And I don't see them being removed or moving by their own will. I don't see it happening. But people tell me, don't be impatient, historical developments, it takes time. The only problem is that millions of Palestinians and few Israelis like me are a little bit impatient after 42 years of occupation. And I'm not sure that me personally have the patience to wait another 42 years and another 42 years to all those historical developments to take place. Thank you very much.
Gideon, you opened with a critique which suggested that the vast majority of the Israeli media were effectively sheep. I don't know whether they were self-motivated. You said they were self-censored sheep. But what, I mean, when one thinks of our own journalistic experience, all of us have what you talked about, that desire to get the exclusive or whatever. What is it that restrains the Israeli journalist? What is it about, what is it that makes them self-censor? Is it something about their owners, the politicians, or simply being Israeli?
Simply being Israeli. Nobody put in pressure on the Israeli media, no governmental pressure, and many times even not the publishers. It's about serving and pleasing the readers, not bothering them too much. It has a price to write things which people don't want to read. I always tell this story about, we have here Dana, who is our correspondent in London. The next time you'll be in Haaretz, ask for an espresso. And they will direct you to the espresso machine next to the editor's room. And you'll open the closet to take a capsule of espresso, and you will see there quite a big file. And on the file it's written, Gideon Levy, cancellation of subscriptions. And this file is getting bigger, obviously. And it takes some courage for a newspaper and for a publisher and for a writer. And I don't want to speak about myself too much, because I didn't choose this way. I have no other choice today. I mean, it's not that I can't write about anything else, because I saw too much and I witnessed too much, and I couldn't do anything else but to do what I'm doing.
Then I want to take you to the concomitant, which is that you say Israel is a wonderful place to live, sure. and I don't fault that. I mean, the extraordinary thing about being there during the Gaza moment was, of course, that you could drive all over the country, and it was only in the last few kilometers that you were aware that you were anywhere near a field of conflict. And that there is a wonderful life to be had. And yet, if you cast your mind back to Vietnam and America, at least as many families in Israel have children under arms, conscripts, just as they did in Vietnam. And that undermined this wonderful life in America. How can you have a wonderful life if many of those families fear for their children's safety, worry about the time they spend in the occupied territories defending the settlements, with which they probably don't have a great deal of sympathy? I mean, the mainstream Israeli is not somebody who rings up people in settlements and says, do come to dinner. I mean, these are people who have come in from Brooklyn very often and are not, part of the Western weave. So can you explain how you can have a wonderful life and a child in the army?
First of all, I have a child in the army and I have a wonderful life. But thanks God he doesn't serve in the occupied territories. Look, first of all, we have to face the figures. It's already by now, almost half of the Israeli young people don't serve in the army. Half of the half are the Orthodox who don't serve the army. And there are more and more secular Israelis who find their way very easily not to serve in the army. People don't talk about it. Maybe it's not half, but a little less than half, but it's a meaningful figure. People don't talk about it. The media is not covering it too much, but there are many Israelis who don't serve there, not because of ideology, because of convenience. And more, it is easy to find your way out. Health problems, psychological problems, you find your way out. Then out of those who serve, most of them don't serve in the occupied territories. Finally, it's about quite a small part who serve in the occupied territories. And usually, and not by mistake, most of them are from the lower classes. For example, the border police, they are all from the lowest classes, immigrants, Jews, and others, which is a very cynical way to send them, the most frustrated one, to confront the occupied people and in many ways to express all their frustrations on them. So I don't say that life is paradise. Sure, there are parents who are worried, and sure, there are parents who don't sleep at night, and sure, there are parts of Israel who live in fear, and sure, we all Israelis lived in enormous fear in the Second Intifada years, when each sitting in a cafe and each riding in a bus was almost suicidal, because you could never know what will happen, and it was really horrifying. But when I look at the last years, which are rather peaceful, and when I look even at Cast Lead, with certain Israelis killed, out of them, I don't know what, 8, 9 soldiers, out of them half from friendly fire, because there was no real fighting, and there was not real Palestinian resistance, because it was not a war, but an aggressive operation. Finally, you see that with some exceptions, with better periods and worse periods, life, at least in Tel Aviv, which is the place where everything is happening, life in Tel Aviv is very good, and Israelis finally don't pay any price for the occupation.
Well, before I move to ask everybody else to ask their questions, let me put one other point to you, which is that here you very much out on your own, perhaps with a small number of others, but basically criticizing the occupation, criticizing the government for its role in what is happening. Can you really do this without, as you said, I don't have a solution? I mean, I know I asked you last night, do you have any expectation of the peace talks which open next week in Washington, and you, in common with virtually vast majority of Palestinians, vast majority of Israelis, said, no, I don't. No expectation whatever. Well, don't you have an obligation somewhere within your mind to say, I've experienced all this stuff, I have seen things which other people in Israel have never seen. Here's what I think has to happen.
Sure, I know what should have happened, but
No, should have, but now. Has to. It's no good talking about the past. Now.
Look, when for years I was calling, in my modest way, to put an end to the occupation. By the way, I thought that the occupation should come to its end in an unconditioned way. If I steal your car, I can't put conditions for returning it. And I thought that the occupation, because it is illegal and criminal and not human, and especially after what happened in 48, this should have come to its end long time ago. But the settlements and the Israeli public opinion did everything possible to prevent any possibility, or almost any possibility. What I have my solution, I would have done it today as well. France had pulled out 1 million settlers from Algeria, and it worked. And I do think that Israel still, if there would have been the leadership and the understanding of the public opinion of the need to do it, I would have done it today, gradually, step by step, but I would put an end to this criminal project of the settlements, which half of the lands of the settlements are private lands.
But they did it in Gaza. Isn't that a model that alarms the Israeli population?
It does, because again, it is described in a wrong way. Gaza remained a jail. But there are two jails in the world, one jail in which the guards sit inside the jail, and there are many jails in which the guards sit just around the jail, and guards sit from the outside. You can't just pull out, take the keys, throw it to the sea and say, now let's see, let's make an experiment in human beings, let's see what will happen there when they are all in a blockade, which, by the way, Egypt carries a responsibility as well in participating, in collaborating with the siege. But the lesson for the Israelis is, again, out of context, because they say, look, we pulled out, we put an end to the occupation, and they are launching missiles on us. But that's not the real way to see it. They are putting those missiles, which didn't serve them much, mainly because that's the only way to remind of their existence. As horrible as it sounds, if the people of Gaza will not launch the Qassams, who will care about Gaza in the world? Who will think about Gaza? Who will remember that Gaza exists? You see in the last years, nothing. Nobody hears about Gaza. Nobody cares about Gaza. Only the flotillas brought them back to some kind of awareness. So putting an end to the occupation is still the basic condition for anything. And it's still possible, but is becoming more and more hard, and not by chance.
Let me open it to the floor. Has anybody got? I think your hand at the very back was the first I spotted. No, one beyond you, sir, and then I'll come back to you.
I would need a piece of paper.
Yes.
If you have. Oh, maybe I have.
I think £5.
I have so many.
There we are. Look, how about that?
Great. Okay, sorry.
I'm not a journalist, so in one way I'm your customer for all those journalists here. Can you hear me?
Yes, very well.
Yeah.
Very well.
Okay, good. I think a couple of points I'd just like to make, and then perhaps I can ask you a question. You did indicate that there was something like 5 billion non-Jews or non-Israelis against 5 million, you call them Jews rather than Israelis, and that the sheer weight of numbers of the opposition must mean that the Israelis are wrong. The second point that you made was that you are one lone voice against, you didn't say how many, but let us say 20,000 Israeli journalists who are supine, who are self-censoring, I think were the words that you used. Because, and the words there were, they were pleasing their readers. Isn't that what journalists do? Isn't that what sells newspapers? Isn't that why people who have similar views buy the Daily Mail or the Guardian? Yeah? Journalists generally get the audience that they seek. So I'm interested, one, to know why you feel that your lone voice is right, but 5 million against 5 billion voices must be wrong. But however, main point is, what actually are you trying to achieve? Are you trying to change Israeli public opinion? Are you trying to make it more, the Israelis feel more confident that they should change what they are doing? And let us face it, Israelis, I'm sure, admit that their state is not perfect. They admit that it does make many, many mistakes. If you're trying to change their minds, if you're trying to accommodate them, if you're trying to say, shouldn't we do something different, then your confrontational approach is extremely unlikely to make any difference. In fact, it will just get more and more reverse comments, more and more resistance. So what really are you trying to achieve?
Yeah, first of all, I'm not sure we see the role of journalism eye to eye. I'm not sure that journalism... Okay. I mean, it's legitimate. You will see it in a different way. And your way for sure is today the mainstream way in this country and in my country. But I still believe that journalism has some role to play. And not only to amuse the readership. Above all, to inform. Let's leave now opinions, because opinions we get all of them. Also in the Israeli media, also in the popular media, you have radical left articles, opinion pages, and right-wing articles. That's not the problem. The problem is of the flow of information. And I believe that the serious media, serious press, serious journalism is obliged to tell the full story, to tell a full story.
But you're not telling the full story.
Well, hang on
Just a second. Just a second.
Hang on a minute.
And telling the full story is an obligation of a press. For sure, I'm telling one side of it. But am I alone? I wish. But I'm not. I'm part of a whole Israeli media, which 95, 98% of it is telling the opposite story. Telling the narrative, telling many times lies and propaganda, which is the easiest way, by the way. To call, for example, I just give you a small example. In the entire Israeli media, the people who were on the flotilla are defined as terrorists. I was asking once, what's the definition of terrorism, of terrorists? In which way were they terrorists? Terrorists are usually people who attack civilians. Did they attack any civilians, those Turks? Were they armed, those Turks? How come we call them terrorists? You can say they were aggressive, you can say they were violent, but how can you call them terrorists? Based on what? This I call propaganda, lies, and not good journalism. Because to call them terrorists is not good journalism. But the Israelis like to hear that they were terrorists, because then what guilt do we carry for the killings? Because killing terrorists is okay. So I'm not sure that what you call the role of journalism is what I call journalism, and I'm speaking mainly about informing in a fair way the whole picture with all its aspects and not avoiding a whole part of it, like the occupation.
Okay.
I just say about my role, my goal. I'm not trying to influence anyone. I'm far too modest to think that I can influence anyone. I don't carry, I'm just a journalist. I don't carry any, big words and big missions. And the maximum I can say is that what I was trying throughout all those years, in vain, was to prevent the Israelis this luxury of claiming they didn't know, of claiming they don't know what's going on in the territories. And many times, you know what, I think I'm writing for the archives, which is also a role. I don't feel I influenced, for sure I didn't change much, and I don't have this pretension to change. I'm doing what I know to do and what I'm trying to do, and whoever reads and listens is welcome, and whoever prefers the official version with all its lies and propaganda, it's his choice.
Let's take a cluster of questions. Yes, sir. You, and then you with your paper in the air.
Yeah. The first thing I'd like to say is I'd like to submit a quotation from Ernest Hemingway when he was reporting from Spain during the Spanish Civil War, which was, "We must learn to discern that which is the truth and then to report it truthfully." And I suspect that's exactly what you're doing. My question is, why do you think America is so enslaved as it is to Israel?
We'll hold that one, and let's get this one here, please.
Hello, my name is Richard Tebboth. This may ramble a bit. In the last month...
Don't do that. Don't do that. Don't do that. Let's keep it crisp.
It'll be relevant.
We're going to cut an OMO ad out of it.
In the last
let's
month,
go.
I have visited, probably in chronological order, historically, Theresienstadt, Auschwitz, no, Wannsee and Auschwitz. Wannsee is where the final solution was actually ratified. Turning to the Middle Eastern situation, we could envisage a zero-state solution in which an Israeli attack on Iran brings a nuclear Armageddon of some sort to us. There is debate recently about a one-state solution again. I'd like Gideon to comment on the possibility of a one-state solution. But more realistically, the two-state solution. What guarantee can an Israeli state have of its security in a two-state solution? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll take one more question here.
Eldon Dahrendorf, former chair of the New Israel Fund in Britain and a grateful reader. Two questions. One, there are plans afoot for a small Jewish boat to Gaza, which would have a bit of aid, but mainly to make a moral point and get attention. Do you think that's a good idea? Because some people feel it's counterproductive. But my second question is about the Washington conference. There has, and the miracles that you've witnessed in the last 20 years elsewhere, there has been a kind of shift in Washington because of Iraq and Afghanistan and a new awareness that everything is connected and Israel is part of all that. Optimism is too strong a word, but will that perhaps shift the American administration?
So three interesting areas there, which you're going to deal with in less than 2 minutes, Gideon.
Much less. Much less. The first and the last question are connected.
Yeah.
Why is the United States so enslaved and change in Washington? I think the Jewish lobby has an enormous role, but I would suggest not to put everything on the Jewish lobby, because this is not serious to think that one lobby can put the entire American policy in its small pocket. I wouldn't go for this, even though it has a huge, huge influence, as we know, also in Europe. And I think it's counterproductive, because one day it will explode in our faces. And I think also that today an automatic, blind support to Israel and to the occupation is not friendship toward Israel. By all means not friendship toward Israel. By all means not caring about the future of Israel. And I don't know to explain why the Americans are so enslaved with Israel. Part of us say it's because of the Christians, part of us say because of the Jewish lobby, and still ununderstandable. And there are changes, as you said, minor ones. And I wouldn't go for really upgrading them or overestimating them, but there are changes, no doubt. But still, when you see the relations between Israel and America, many times you ask yourself, who is the superpower between the two? And many times you can't tell, and it still goes for a long way to really make a change in the American policy. The last 1.5 years was wasting so much time about such a stupid issue like freezing the settlements, when this should have been a minimum condition for anything. I mean, if there is a prime minister who speaks about two-state solution and he's not even ready to freeze the settlements, to stop building there, you add another floor to a building that you are about to demolish. And this shows his intentions by all means, that this became an issue. This should have been automatically. Freezing, that's the minimum. If not starting to evacuate, so at least stop building. And we wasted on this 1.5 years. And now those negotiations, which are very dangerous, because it's not only about another scene in this masquerade. It's also about what will be if it will fail. We see already what happens when negotiations are failing in the Middle East. We saw it in the year of 2000. So we have to be very careful before we started this way, this road, thinking also about the option that it will not succeed, and how can it succeed with this Israeli government when more than half of its members declared openly that they don't believe in peace with the Palestinians, that they are opposing any kind of evacuation of any settlements. So where can it lead to? I really don't know. About the one-state solution, first of all, we have today a one-state. All those talking about one-state solution, Israel is one state, including the occupation. It's very difficult to admit it, but that's the matter of fact. The Israeli army is the sovereign in the occupied territories, and the territories and the Palestinian people, the occupied Palestinian people, is part and parcel of the state of Israel. And can you call it differently than an apartheid state? I would love to be convinced that it's not. Just come with me once to the occupied territories and just tell me, how will I define a road which is only for Jews? Or two lines in a checkpoint where one line is for Jews, or Israelis if you want, and one line is for the Palestinians. How can you call it except of apartheid? I will be happy not to define it as apartheid. I can just tell you that a few months ago I hosted a delegation of human rights activists from South Africa, including 2 Supreme Court judges. We went together to the refugee camp of Balata next to Nablus. And after a whole day there, on the bus back to Tel Aviv, I asked them, no. And they said, no, it cannot be compared to apartheid. In our view, it's worse than apartheid. So I don't say it's worse than apartheid, because in many ways it's much better than apartheid. But the comparison is a fair one, and we are living in one state in which there are at least 3 kinds of citizens or inhabitants: the Jewish ones, the Israeli Palestinian citizens, and the Palestinians under occupation, with very, very clear division of rights, of basic human rights to each group. You can call it democracy, you can call it whatever you want, but it looks like apartheid, it smells like apartheid, it moves like apartheid, and it is apartheid.
Let's have another cluster of questions. Yes, you, ma'am, on the extreme there.
Hi. I just wanted to know how, in a world where everyone seems to be obsessed with consuming in the media news and events and numbers, and especially in this time of the peace process, I feel like it's all about political parties and governments and what the countries are thinking, how we can bring that humanization that you and Amira Hass and other journalists in both Israel and Palestine, I think, are trying to campaign for, how we can bring that into the mainstream.
Thank you very much. And I'll take you, the second in from the wall there, over the back there.
Yeah, just a quick question about trust. I mean, isn't a lot of this about trust? And after sort of withdrawal from Gaza and Hezbollah and Hamas not necessarily wanting a peace deal with Israel, I just wonder how Israelis feel they can actually sort of trust enough to sort of not to react in this right-wing way that they often do when they're provoked. And the rest of the Arab world doesn't necessarily seem to support peace deals. 2000 sort of broke down. Arafat didn't want to go ahead with that. So, you know, land for peace is an active concept. So when's that going to happen?
And one more. I'll take you right at the back, sir.
May I ask, to what extent do you think that time is running out for a viable Palestinian state? And do you think that inevitably there'll be another intifada, particularly in the West Bank, areas designated as Area C, which is those areas under full Israeli control?
Thank you.
I wish I knew how to bring humanization or humanizing the Palestinians to the Israeli public conscience. If I would have known the answer, I would have done it long time ago. I'm afraid I don't know how to do it, especially not when you confront all the other agencies which are taking this part in dehumanizing them on a daily basis. We had this satire program on TV the other day, and they interviewed, a few months ago, they interviewed Member of Parliament, Palestinian Member of Parliament, Dr. Ahmad Tibi, who happened to be a physician. And the interviewer asked him in a very humoristic way, are you a doctor or are you a Palestinian? You have to decide. Which was humoristic, but it showed. I don't know how to go against this wave. So many times I tell about Palestinian friends, a Palestinian friend who plays the piano. What? Palestinian plays the piano? How can it be? It is so deep-rooted that I really don't know how to uproot it. About trust and Hamas and the Israeli fears. Look, with all the respects to the Israeli fears, Israel is a regional superpower with arsenal of weapons that very few countries in the world possess. And I'm a little sick and tired of this way of thinking that we are the weak ones, we are the David, and they are the Goliath, and they want to destroy us. We are strong enough. This was good for the first years of the state of Israel. This is totally irrelevant today. Those fears are manipulated in many ways. And you know, the occupation does not guarantee any security either. From my point of view, it endangers the future of Israel and does not for sure have any meaning. Today, territory has very little meaning in terms of security. In the era of missiles, what does it mean? Another 50 kilometers or another 50 miles or less? It's about justice. It's about creating. There are no guarantees. Sure, there are no guarantees. I'm not sure that everything will go smoothly and Israel will pull out of the territories and the Middle East will turn into a paradise. I'm not sure. But I'm not sure Israel is in a condition to put conditions. And I'm not sure, I'll give you just a quotation of someone else who wrote once about the occupation. About this patient who comes to the doctor. And the doctor tells him, you have a tumor in your kidney. Ask the patient, what should I do? The doctor says, we have to remove your kidney. Ask the patient, and can you guarantee me I will live? The doctor answers, no, but I can guarantee you that if we will not remove your kidney, you will surely die. I think the occupation, putting an end to it, should not be a question at all. I'm not sure Israel has the right to put a question on it. And even if it's not guaranteed that security will be total after removing it, we don't have any other choice. About time running out, yes, time is running out. I'm not sure that it didn't run out. You are a country of football. I'm not a big expert of football, but in Hebrew we call it, after the 90 minutes, you add, in Hebrew we call it injury time.
Yep, same.
You call it injury time?
We do.
So people in Scotland were ignorant because they told me they call it extra time. Okay.
Well, maybe we don't. I don't
Okay.
know. Maybe it's injury time. We're all a bit obsessed with the rugby story in which somebody faked their injury and there was injury time in rugby. Maybe not in football.
Okay, I don't know.
No.
In any case, in Hebrew you call it injury time.
No.
We are exactly in injury time, if at all. Maybe it is still possible, even though to remove 500,000 settlers or even 300,000, it's far beyond the capability of any potential Israeli leadership right now. But the alternative is so much worse that maybe it will happen by itself and maybe it will happen gradually. But for sure, we are very, very, very late.
I'm going to take one more round of questions, and then, you know, when you're signing books and things, you can have more chat with them. And I'll take you right in the corner, and I'll take you, and I'll have a man. Where is a man? There's a man here. Oh, there's a man here. I'll tell you, we haven't had nobody in the front row. Okay, fine.
Thank you, John. My name is Carol Gould. I'm a journalist. You mentioned the last couple of years things being quiet. Many people would say it's because of the wall. You haven't mentioned the wall tonight.
Yeah.
So I wondered if you have any thoughts on that.
Good question, thank you. And the second one, where were you? Yes? Where was the one I... It was you, yes, sorry.
How effective do you think sanctions are?
I beg your pardon?
Sanctions, how effective
Yeah.
are they? And finally, in the front row...
Actually, my question was a little bit similar. I'm involved with the boycott, divestment and sanctions movement that's growing in this country. In fact, I've just returned from 2 weeks in France with French activists, which I found very inspiring. And interesting that you mentioned about Algeria, because quite a few people on that group were of Algerian extraction. I'm wondering also whether you feel, especially if the movement becomes more international, more integrated, we can make a big difference or not. Thank you.
Thank you for those questions. First of all, about the wall, I was not against the wall, but as the Americans say, good fences make good neighbors. I thought that you never build a fence between you and your neighbor in the bedroom of your neighbor. And this is what Israel had done. Would the wall be on the green line? I wouldn't say a word. But you can't build it miles away from the green line in many cases. Why? What do you gain out of it? What intention do you show by this? If it was about security, so why not on the green line? And if it would have been on the green line, nobody would have said a word. I don't believe in walls. I can take each of you tomorrow when I go back to Israel and take you to the West Bank. John, maybe you will be the first one. And we'll meet any Palestinian terrorist or so-called terrorist or former terrorist or whatever. And I can tell you within 2 hours he will be in Tel Aviv with all the wall. I think that the terror didn't stop because the wall. Terror stopped because a whole Palestinian generation was smashed, paid enormous price in the Second Intifada without seeing any kind of results. Part of them were killed, part of them are in jail, part of them were injured, and part of them are totally frustrated because it didn't lead to anywhere. All the suicide bombers, all the price that both peoples paid didn't lead to any progress for the Palestinian people whatsoever. And I think it will take for another generation to grow up and uprise again. But I don't think that the wall is the main reason. I don't want to say that the wall has no role at all. For sure, it makes it harder to get to Tel Aviv, to Jerusalem, to Haifa. It makes it harder, but it didn't make it impossible. It made the life of many Palestinians impossible, that's for sure, who were cut from their fields, who were cut from their relatives, who were cut from their business. And I must say here, and this must be said here, because we have to be fair, life in the West Bank in the last year or two is much easier than before. Most of the checkpoints were cancelled, and freedom of movement within the West Bank is today as good as had not been for many years now. This must be acknowledged. About the sanction, which is a big issue here, I would like to say the following things. First of all, as an Israeli who does not boycott Israel, I cannot call others to boycott Israel. I think this would have been hypocrisy. If I would have boycotted Israel, I could call others to boycott Israel. Me personally, on a personal basis, I boycott any product from the settlements. This I can call anyone, because this I'm doing by myself. But I can't call others to boycott a state that I am part of it and don't intend to leave it. By all means not, as long as I'll be able to live in Israel. I will never leave Israel. So I cannot call others to boycott. Having said this, I have to say that, first of all, the weapon of boycott is a legitimate weapon. Israel should be the first one to admit it, because Israel is using the boycott more maybe than any other country in the world. What is the siege on Gaza? What is the boycott on Hamas? What is the call to put sanctions on Iran if not using this weapon? So for sure it's a legitimate weapon in Israeli eyes, official Israeli eyes. But boycott should not become a goal. It's a mean, it's not a goal. I can very easily understand the sentiments of many people in Europe who want to punish Israel. Believe me, many times I feel like punishing Israel. But this by itself, if it will not be effective, has no meaning. And the question is, will it be effective? That's the main question. So on one hand, I truly believe that as long as the Israelis don't pay for the occupation, nothing will change. On the other hand, will they draw the right conclusions out of the sanctions? The Israelis paid a hell of a price in the Second Intifada, but none of them made the connection between the occupation and terror. And therefore, the terror didn't achieve anything in the Israeli society. Because people tend to believe that Palestinians were born to kill, that they are monsters, and nobody asked why. Why do young people go and commit suicide and sacrifice anything they have in order to kill Israelis? What makes them become like this? And if you would dare to raise this question, people will say, oh, you are justifying terror. And I can tell you here that terror was and will always be the weapon of the weak one. Any of the suicide bombers would rather sit in an American Apache and push a button and send some missiles on Tel Aviv. And this wouldn't be considered terror, by all means not. And they didn't achieve anything because the Israelis did not make the connection between terror and occupation. Same about the sanctions. If I would be convinced that Israelis will understand that if the world is putting sanctions on Israel, maybe something wrong is about the Israeli policy, something very small, but something should be corrected, some small details, then I would say it's effective. I'm not sure this will be the case. Maybe yes, maybe no. I'm very hesitating about it because I really don't know, would it push the Israeli society to a more nationalistic corner and more aggressive corner? Or would it really bring people to think, you know, many times I thought, what can you do to the Israelis worse than to prevent them to come to Marks and Spencer in London? I mean, I can't think about the worst punishment. So maybe asking Israelis for visas for the UK or preventing settlers to come to the UK would bring the occupation to its end, because even the settlers like to make shopping in Marks and Spencer. But I'm not sure this is the case, and I'm sorry I don't give you a very clear answer because I really don't know. I fully understand the sentiment. I can't call you to boycott because I'm not boycotting. And I hope it will be effective, but I'm not sure.
Well, Gideon Levy, I didn't think we would end on an image of settlers shopping in Marks and Spencer's. But I would like to thank you very warmly for talking with us. I'd like also to thank Verso, the publishers of your book, The Punishment of Gaza, and I'd like to thank the Frontline Club for...
I would like also to say a word.
Last
word.
Yeah, no, go for it. Something optimistic.
Something very optimistic. But not concerning the Middle East. First of all, I would like to thank you, John. It's the second evening we're spending together. I'm going to miss you tomorrow evening. And I'm going to miss you all from the point of view that I wish there would have been this awareness, those questions, this involvement, this devotion that I saw here in the last 2 weeks, almost 2 weeks that I've been here. If this would be the case in Israel right now, in the Israeli society, maybe we wouldn't have to sit here together and ask all those questions, because those evenings are almost impossible in Israel because of lack of awareness. And last word, I would really like to take this opportunity to thank, because it's my last evening in the UK in this tour, to deeply thank my publishers, Verso, and all the people who were organizing this tour of mine here, which was, from my point of view, a very moving one and a very successful one. I really want to thank them for the courage, because it takes also some courage, I guess, to publish books like my articles book, and to thank them for the hospitality, and to thank all of you for the interest, for the knowledge, and for the devotion, each of you, to come in such a rainy evening to listen to Gideon Levy. This is really, should sound crazy in Tel Aviv. So thank you very much.